and company founders, Jim Semick, founder of ProductPlan, and Eric Boduch, founder of Pendo. Both have extensive experience starting companies and in the software industry, as well as in the product and product development space. So we're really excited to hear from both of them and get some great insights into what it takes to be data-driven, both from a product roadmap as well as a product success angle. So to start things off, I'd like to hand things over to Jim Semick, founder of ProductPlan. Jim, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I do want to point out that we'll be recording the webinar today, and so this will be available after the event if you'd like to share that out with others. But we'll kick things off today with a poll. I've been in product management for many years now, and there are so many great new analytics tools available for product managers, product marketing, for engineering and UX and other folks. It'd be really, I think, a useful thing for me to understand who is on the call today. And so we're going to pop up a poll here in a second that asks for your job title or your category. And so if you could just answer that, that'll give us a feel for what direction to take the webinar. So we'll give this a few seconds here. I suspect that a lot of the folks today will be in product management. Okay, great. So give us just another second here, but let's go ahead and show those results in a second. Okay, great. As I suspected, most of you are in product management, and a few folks in marketing, and some in UX and others. And in the product management world, with so many new analytics tools and resources that are available to us, there really is this kind of a fire hose of data and metrics available to you to use. So and a lot of those metrics come to you after you've launched a product, or even before you have a product. You can think about what the metrics are. And so what I'm going to talk about today is defining some of those product goals and setting strategic goals, and then figuring out what are the metrics that tie back to those strategic goals, and then finally communicating that on the roadmap. And Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're going to talk about here?
Sure, thanks, Jim. I'm going to concentrate a lot on measuring success, how you look at user activities, how you leverage your data, things you should think about measuring if you're not already, and just a couple examples of both how we measure at Pendo and how we've seen other people measure.
Okay, terrific. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about setting those product goals. But before we do that, I'd like to run another really quick poll here about how and whether you prioritize your roadmap and your product strategy based on strategic goals. And so let's put up that that slide here. So what we mean by strategic goals is, do you have a consistent process for setting short-term strategic goals for your product line, and then using those goals to prioritize what you put for the long-term product roadmap? So let's take a second here and answer that question. So we'll close that out in just a second here. Okay, great. So sometimes is the more common, and that's actually what I would have expected. A lot of product management is nuanced. It's not scientific, and so it's really hard sometimes to consistently prioritize the roadmap based on strategic goals. There are always these outside influences that affect our decision making, whether it's an executive stopping us in the hall with their pet project, or whether it's a high-profile customer of yours that's giving you some direction about what to build, whether it's competitive pressures and so on. And so there always are these outside influences. But I think that this idea of top-down strategic planning, the idea of doing goal-driven product management is really something that is becoming more and more common rather than the seat-of-your-pants approach. And so I'll start by talking a little bit about this scientific mindset that I think product managers can really benefit from. And if you think like a scientist, scientists first describe their hypothesis, then they define a test, and then they measure it. And product managers can do the same thing by setting goals and then setting some metrics for those goals. And so in my experience, the scientific mindset is one of the best ways to guide products to success. And if you have that scientific mindset even before a product is launched, then you'll have a much greater chance of launching a successful product. So, let's just talk about a quick example here. You might decide that some sort of conversion metric, such as the percentage of trial customers who convert to paying customers, is an important thing to measure. And even before the product launches, even without solid customer data, you can still create a hypothesis about what you think you would see as an ideal target. And so I think that sort of thinking leads to really great and valuable team conversations about the business model. And then once you actually do start getting some customer data, then you're able to make some very good decisions. So I'll talk for a second here about this top-down strategic planning that I mentioned. Most of you probably have seen something like this, some way of thinking about how you develop the product roadmap and eventually get to the features that are delivered through your release plan and your backlog. Well, most products have and adhere to this very long-term product vision. And that product vision is really this guiding principle that doesn't change often. And so it's the thing that will last for years. And the product may not be there yet to deliver on that vision, but you're driving towards it. And then you develop these product goals based on that product vision. So if Google's product vision, for example, is to make everything in the world and on the internet searchable, well, there are certain goals that help you deliver on that promise. And so those product goals are the things that you can begin to categorize on your product roadmap in order to communicate to the executive team and other stakeholders the direction that you're taking the product. And finally, from that product roadmap, you develop the release plan and backlog. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about identifying the right metrics to use. So I kind of put these into a couple of different buckets. And note that there are these quantitative metrics that I'm going to talk about, but there are also qualitative metrics. And I do want to make the point that there is a place for qualitative metrics on your product roadmap, these things that you really can't measure precisely. And the qualitative metrics are really important, especially for early stage products where you don't really have a lot of tangible customer data. But these examples here that I'm going to talk about are really the more quantitative metrics. So for example, we might have some customer success and product engagement metrics. So these are things like product usage and adoption, percentage of users who take a specific action, that sort of thing. And then you can have these business-oriented metrics that are often financially related. For example, the cost to acquire a new customer or the lifetime value of a customer. So they're the bigger picture metrics that don't tie back to specific customer actions, but really point to the success overall of the business or the product. Now, if you're just getting started with thinking through metrics-driven product management, if you're just getting started with launching a new product or service, you might be wondering, where do I start? How do I find information about, how do I identify these metrics in the first place? And so, I often suggest to people that they begin by researching metrics that are discussed in their industry. So you can start with industry analysts. You can talk to experts in the industry. You talk about the metrics online about what's important for that particular product line. You can look at information about competitive products, especially if you're in a market where there are companies that are publicly traded. A lot of those metrics are mentioned either in the online documents, or they're mentioned by analysts discussing the publicly traded company, or even in the conversations that happen during earnings calls when you have analysts asking the folks questions, the executives questions. You'll really start to uncover some of those metrics that are used to define the success of the business. I do caution you, though, that there are a lot of metrics out there that are what I call vanity metrics. So, there are metrics that you'll see, through news channels or PR outlets. That they look really good in a press release, but they don't really relate to the business results. The number of Twitter followers, or or even the number of page views on a particular website. Those are not necessarily metrics that relate to the success of the product. And so I caution you about, tying some of those vanity-oriented metrics into your decision-making. So let's talk about some specifics here. Let's talk about some examples in both customer-related and business-related metrics that you can use. So, one of the more popular ones is this product usage or product adoption. So you can measure overall sign-in frequency, how often people share things, other metrics to gauge whether your users are increasing usage or adoption over time. Now, at ProductPlan, we measure all sorts of metrics around engagement with our product roadmap software. We look at how often product managers are sharing their roadmap with their executives. So we look at this metadata across our pool of customers that helps us understand whether we're encouraging adoption and engagement, or whether things are moving in the right direction. So that's just an example. Now, some other examples are measuring user efficiency, looking at measuring the completion of a process. So, for example, if you have a job requisition system, you want, and there are multiple steps in order to post a job online. You might measure the completion rate at every point in the process. So you can measure throughout time and figure out where people are dropping off in that process. So you can look at those sorts of things, and those are very specific customer-oriented metrics that you could use. Another metric that you can use is the last one on the list here, which is this quality metrics. You can look at metrics such as the number of bugs that are reported, or you can look at your net promoter score. So you can look at things like that help you determine if the quality of your product is improving in the right direction. Okay. Now, these business-oriented metrics are at that higher level that I was talking about earlier. So the cost to acquire a customer. If your business is software as a service, such as ProductPlan software as a service, we look at metrics such as the cost to acquire a typical new customer, and lifetime value. So that's a very important metric in our industry. So, for example, if I look at the cost to acquire a new customer, if it's significantly less than their overall lifetime value, then I have a viable business. And so these are the metrics that you can use to measure the success of the business overall, and sometimes they relate together. So you don't look at these metrics in an isolated way. You look at them overall. So some other metrics, for example, if you're running a subscription business, might be monthly recurring revenue, or average revenue per customer, or conversion rates from different stages in the purchase funnel. So the number of people that visit your website versus take some action on the website, such as downloading an ebook or perhaps signing up for a trial. So these are all actionable metrics that help you determine if the business is moving in the right direction. So I do want to encourage you, though, that with the tools that you have available today, whether you're using some sort of a customer engagement system or some sort of a metrics system that helps, like Pendo, that helps you kind of aggregate all of this information, or whether you're using Google Analytics or a tool like that, I encourage you to try to limit the number of metrics that you're using at any given time. So try to figure out the most important metrics for your product. And if you're talking about a handful, 4 or 5 metrics that you can discuss consistently with your executive team, you're going to be in a great position to be able to do that. Now, if you're throwing out, if you just have blasting people with this fire hose of data, people don't really know what's important. So your stakeholders really need to understand what are the key metrics that you're measuring on a week-by-week or month-by-month or quarter-by-quarter basis, and how you're tying those metrics back to product-oriented decisions. Okay, so let's talk about that now. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to communicate those strategic goals. So one of the best ways to communicate your strategic goals is through your product roadmap. And this is a product plan, product roadmap example. And there are multiple different ways of representing those strategic goals. In this example here, we're using the color coding to denote the strategic goal. So, for example, let's focus on this color coding here. So you can see that we're talking about goals like customer satisfaction goals, revenue expansion, market expansion, going mobile, and then performance. And so, Mike, if you would move to the next section there. There you go. So you can look at these goals, and behind those goals are the specific metrics that tie back to it. So customer satisfaction might tie back to Net Promoter Score. Revenue expansion might tie back to monthly recurring revenue, or MRR. So you have those very specific metrics that back it up. And really, your executives and your stakeholders should know that. And the next part of the slide, please. When you're communicating the strategic goals, you want to be able to, as you're talking about specific items that are in your roadmap, and next part of the slide, please, you want to be able to always tie that back to how it relates to the goals. So, for example, if you're planning this new feature, why are we doing this to begin with? Is it for user satisfaction? Is it really to support expansion in geographic regions and so on? So whatever the goals happen to be, you always want to be talking about those goals and providing the real metrics behind it. Okay, great. So I think that we're going to move on to the next section, and Eric is going to be talking about actually measuring product success. And I think you have a poll, Eric, for this next section here. And I can talk through this one if you like, or you can do this one.
No, we're good to go. I'm going to launch the poll. So, how advanced are you at measuring product success? And the last one's, we are advanced versus we don't measure at all. Give people a moment to answer that.
And while we're taking the poll, I do want to remind people that as we go through this talk here today, we're happy to take questions during the talk. So if you want to pop in any questions here during the webinar, there's a question section of the GoToWebinar side panel. Pop those in there, and we'll get them answered along the way here, either live or in private.
So here are some results, and I would say this isn't atypical. We see that the emphasis on metrics is definitely a big trend right now, but it's something that people are generally, just getting started at, or are moving to what they would self-define as average, as opposed to advanced. And with that, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about measurement, and start by saying why measurement matters. And measurement does matter. You can see from this series of graphs that companies that invest in measuring and obviously using those measurements to make positive changes, those companies exceed the performance of their peers. They generate more revenues, they grow faster, they have more engaged users, and it's definitely a leading indicator of renewal. So what you'll see is, with engagement comes less churn. Next, I'm often asked a little bit about what to measure. And Jim touched on a lot of different things you could be measuring, and he also emphasized this point of, pick what matters to you, concentrate on those metrics, measure it diligently. So the two things I wanted to talk about today, because there are lots of things to talk about and what to measure, the two things I wanted to focus on and highlight are two things we measure. One's NPS, and one is product success. And I'm going to jump into those in a minute, but when you think about measurement, I know a question came across, so I'll answer in more detail at the end, but measurement and the types of measurement you do could be affected a lot by your current stage. If you're a new company just getting started, there's a lot of qualitative measurements you want to do. You want to actually poll customers and ask them, what did you like about this feature? What didn't you like about this feature? As your company grows and you're a later stage, measurement shifts more and more to quantitative measurements, like, hey, I have 10,000 customers. How many are using this feature? Or how many of my 10,000 customers efficiently are able to go through this particular process, maybe a checkout process or creating a guide. So what I find that, there's a transition. Most every product team talks to customers, but I'm often surprised as companies scale that how often the product teams don't take the time to track actual customer usage. So that quantitative point is an area that I think companies can do a better job addressing. So first, on more of the qualitative side, I was going to talk about one of the things we do, which is measuring NPS, Net Promoter Score. And first, just because not everyone knows what Net Promoter Score is, I thought I'd go about and define that. So Net Promoter Score from Bain, it's based upon a fundamental perspective that every company's customers can be divided into three main categories. Promoters, and what promoters are loyal enthusiasts who keep buying from a company and they urge their friends, peers, coworkers to do the same. A second group is passives. Those are generally satisfied customers, but maybe unenthusiastic. They can be more easily wooed by the competition. And the third area are what are called detractors, and those are unhappy customers trapped in a bad relationship. So those are the areas you definitely don't want to see. The the Net Promoter Score is calculated by looking at and subtracting the detractors from the promoters. So you look at your promoters, you subtract the percentage who are detractors, and that's where you get your Net Promoter Score. So one of the things I would like to think about, one of the things we do kind of from a best practices standpoint, and I think you guys should think about as if you are engaged in Net Promoter Score, if you are using that as a tracking mechanism, is thinking about capturing that information as much as possible inside the application itself. If you do this, you'll reach them at a time at one of those kind of most relevant moments. You'll capture their feedback for better or worse right as your product is top of mind, right as they're engaged in using your product. So we found that doing in-app engagement and capturing Net Promoter Score from your customers while they're in-app as opposed to, say, a survey or a phone call or another mechanism is a very effective way to get the most accurate and the best results. And one of the things you should also think about with NPS is segmentation, like looking at how your Net Promoter Scores change or vary based upon the different segments of your users. So you might want to look at, say, all of your high-paying customers and create a segment like that and see how that Net Promoter Score varies, say, against your low-paying customers. You might want to set up segments based upon geography or even role, if you have different roles, different types of people that use your application. The next thing I wanted to talk about was one of our metrics that we use a lot, which is this concept of product success. Talk a little bit about how we do that. So we look at overall product success and how successful your product is going to be, and a leading indicator of that. And we look at four main portions, four main components. The first is breadth. So we look at it and say, okay, how many people are using the product for a particular given customers or for a particular given customer. The second is depth. Are your customers using key features? So we actually go about and have defined our key features, and then we'll actually track and see what percentage of our customers are using those features. And we use this as a validator, an indicator of retention. The third thing we often do is look at frequency. So how often do our customers access the application? Now, frequency numbers really depend upon your particular product. In our case, we spend a lot of time looking at the last 30 days, It might be important for you that it's quarterly, it might be annual, it might be daily, it might be weekly. Frequency is kind of, you pick the frequency that makes the most sense, and then you look at how things trend over time with that frequency component. And then the fourth major component we look at in kind of this quantitative measurement that we call product success is efficiency. So when you look at your kind of key funnels, like for us, one might be setting up a guide, or a customer, a key funnel might be checking out, or it might be completing a key action, like creating a version of a roadmap. So we see how efficiently customers go through what we consider the optimal path. And then we look at overall completion rate. So we'll analyze the efficiency of completing a task. So we combine these four components, these four indicators: breadth, depth, frequency, and efficiency, and we combine that into a product success score. And we track that over time as a quantitative measurement to how successful we think our customers are in our product. So that's just one example of what we think is an interesting key indicator, and something that everyone can do inside of their own product to look at how well their product is being used by their customers. The next slide, is talking about using metrics. So it's one thing, to capture this information, but you have to make sure you're putting a process in place to use the learnings from your metrics to drive product direction. And it doesn't always have to be, big changes. People say, oh, we learned this grade, and it's going to be in our next release cycle, which is 2 quarters from now, because it's a major change. You might also just want to look at incremental improvements. Like even if it's just as simple as changing the text on a button to better explain it. Like we had a client that had a button that said add location when there was really share photo, right? They wanted to enable you to add the location, and when you clicked on share on the add location, it was in reference to a photo. But we found just by changing the button text to something like share photo and then saying, okay, this is the location of the photo, the efficiency of people moving through that cycle without any confusion went up a lot. And that was just a simple incremental change. So along with kind of redefining process and some of those bigger changes, you can make little incremental changes and then go and track again and see how well the efficiency of that particular path has been improved. And then one thing you can also look at is this concept of guidance. So, we have a lot of customers that say, it's great, we've learned these things, we're applying them to our future direction, but, how can we impact it today? And one thing you could code into your product or use a product for is doing these pop-up messages, whether they're like boxes or banners or tooltips, that explain to the users, oh, this is what we mean by, visitor frequency, or hey, let me walk you through how to add a staging server. So it can be an incremental step that can have a lot of impact on your users, your customers' happiness, by just guiding a user through a process that might be a little too complicated. Maybe you're changing that process in the future, but you can use in-app guidance to affect it today instead of waiting for product changes coming back from engineering. So with that, I was going to throw this back over to Jim to do a quick summary, talk a little bit about what we've talked to today, and then we're going to open it up to questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Eric. That was a great review of some really specific metrics. I think just to kind of wrap things up here, I think that ultimately the metrics that you choose depend on a lot of different things. It depends on the stage of your product. It depends on the industry that you're in. It depends on the type of product that you have, the size of your company. But really, the most important consideration is for you to focus on a limited number of metrics, and those limited number of metrics that really matter, the things that really tie back to the success of the product or the business. And so, and if you can figure out what those handful of metrics are that are really important to you, and then tie that back to your organization's top-line goals, business results, product goals, then you're going to be in a much better position to be able to sell the product strategy that you've defined on your product roadmap. And so, I think that we all understand that, if you can provide data, if you can provide some evidence to your executives and your stakeholders about why you're doing something, your job as a product manager will be ultimately so much easier. So with that, I think that wraps things up, and Mike, do you want to take it back here and see if we have any questions from the audience?
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much. And we've got a number of good questions coming in. I think, Jim, this is probably a good one for you. First one that came in. When should I use qualitative versus quantitative metrics?
Oh, that's a great one. So I think a lot of it depends on the stage of your business. If you're considering launching a new product, you may or may not have very much in the way of quantitative metrics to use, and so qualitative might be a good place to start. It also depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. So let's use the example of a qualitative metric, such as Net Promoter Score. So that's one of those fuzzy customer success metrics. You wind up with an actual score, and you can measure the improvement of that score over time, but it is very fuzzy because people are at any given time being asked to rate how happy they are, or how satisfied, or how loyal, or how much they're going to refer your product. And so those metrics are really great for understanding the big picture about the direction that you're heading. So you can use Net Promoter Score and something qualitative like that in order to know if you're heading in the right direction or not. And then there are those quantitative metrics, for example, the success of completing a process. And so if you've identified a particular metric, such as the number of people posting a job requisition on the website, then you can use some quantitative metrics to define the success at every stage along the way. So, again, that posting of the job on the job website might be the number one thing that your business is all about. So the number of jobs that are posted, the more that are posted, the more revenue you make, right? So, so it really depends on what you're trying to measure here. And I do encourage you to use a combination of qualitative and quantitative metrics. Often those quantitative metrics are the things that kind of are very specific to actions that the user takes, or very specific about these business metrics, such as the cost to acquire a customer. But you need to pepper in the qualitative metrics as well.
Yeah, and I'd love to just add to that by saying that, you should do both. You need to do both qualitative and quantitative. Now, based upon the stage of your company, when you're starting out, if you have a small number of customers, the data you're going to get, the quantitative data might be in some ways, it's just not enough. So you need to have more of an emphasis then on qualitative. Then as your company scales and grows, and Pendo helps a number of the unicorns out there with their metrics, you'll find that quantitative metrics become more important because the qualitative is more apt to lead you in bad directions, but it's also just harder to do. As your numbers just grow up, it's harder to talk to each individual customer all of the time. So quantitative metrics probably, are increasingly important, and you have to use qualitative metrics for very specific things, like maybe it's this new feature we just launched and getting the feedback there. So there's a need to do both. I see the shift going to quantitative from qualitative as the company grows, and I see the shift starting more as qualitative when there's smaller numbers of users, hence less data.
Yeah,
good. And I was going to say, I think that's a good segue into our next question. This one came up. Much of our roadmap has been determined by attempting to weigh the popularity of feature requests and direct feedback from customers about existing features. Will this be discussed at all? Eric, I think that's probably a good one to talk about the role of data and data at scale as a way to help provide that input into roadmap prioritization decisions.
Yeah, and I'll let Jim touch on this afterwards too, because I'm sure he has something to say. It's a balancing act as a product person, right? You get a lot of feature requests, you get direct feedback from customers. You even have, I'd imagine you're going to have feedback from sales, from customer success. So there's definitely a balancing act in how you build your product, how you use data from all kinds of different constituents. Even from your own personal product direction, your own product team, you're going to get feedback. So I do think you want to capture as much of that information as possible from all the different sources. both using quantitative and qualitative feedback mechanisms. And then I think you want to think about what's particularly important and look at and make sure that you're not just always, say, driving things that your existing customers need, and ignoring things you need to reach a new market. So that's part of the challenge, I would say, of being a product manager. And I think, Jim, your software definitely helps in that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what a lot of our product roadmap software does is help with the communication of the why. Why are we doing certain things? And I'm touching on the popularity of features question. My personal philosophy is that the success of products is often defined by the features that we say no to. There are, at any given time, especially with either one of our businesses, I suspect, we're getting dozens of customer interactions per day, and we have, a list a mile long of potential things that we can do, but there are scarce resources. And regardless of the size of company, you have scarce resources, so you need to decide how to allocate it. And simply delivering to customers what they want and not really thinking through the why is really not a great way to build products, in my opinion. You're going to wind up with feature bloat, and you're going to wind up with products that don't address new markets and don't delight customers because you're delivering features that help them accomplish something that they may not have known that they needed to accomplish. And so, I think that that tying it back to strategic goals of why you're doing something really keeps the product team laser focused on what you're trying to accomplish. And then you back up those decisions with data, data from these metrics that you're delivering on.
Okay. No, good, great question. Thanks, everyone. Next question that came up, what are some of the differences between, say, startup metrics for new products versus established products? And there are some guidelines that that we would suggest. Jim, you want to start with that one?
Sure, that's a great one. And I've been through that exact process, that thought process, with several products, including GoToMeeting and GoToMyPC and AppFolio and now ProductPlan, where the metrics do change over time. In the beginning, the thing that you're concerned about as a startup is my business viable? Is my product viable? Will people actually buy it? And then, and can I actually make a business that makes financial sense? And so you're looking at early stage, you're looking at things like customer acquisition costs. You're looking at things like the number of people that sign up. You're looking at churn rate, retention, things like that. And then over time, as the business grows and the product matures, you are looking at things that are optimizing. So you already know that you have a viable business, and now you're starting to look at some of those more detailed metrics that tie back to those things, such as the number of people that actually sign up or buy your product, but you're getting more detailed with it. So you're getting more refined in the process. You're looking at workflows and people are trying to accomplish certain tasks. And so that's when you can get a little more granular in your metrics. And Eric, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think that is my experience. I think you did a really good job of covering that.
Okay. Next question. Any tips or things you learned for groups that create enterprise or operational products? How do you know your employees love your products, i.e. the app for Uber drivers, etc.? That's a great one.
Yeah, I love this question. In fact, I made Mike ask it next. So, I look at, when you're building software or products, however you want to call them, for internal consumption, it's really not that much different than external consumption in some ways, in a lot of ways. Really, your customers end up being, the other employees or the employees at your company that are using these applications. So you can apply some of the same principles to this, right? You can think about it. You look at Net Promoter and you can apply those concepts, like how happy are you with this feature? How happy are you with the product as a whole? You can capture usage data, like we're built this spell check feature, but no one uses it. Do we really need that? So you might be analyzing and saying, oh, no one's using these features. I can save as a product guy, I can reorientate my engineering resources to say, not put as much time into improving these areas that aren't used as much. I can look at efficiency metrics. I can say, okay, I'm trying to help employees, say, get signed up for an intranet access, right, or whatever it happens to be, HR programs. How efficiently do they go through this process? I could even use, pop-up messages and in-app guides, just like in commercial products. You can apply those to products in-house that'll say, hey, I'm going to step you through, how to do this action, take you through it. So there's a lot of things that you can do for commercial software. You can apply to internally developed software, and you just have to put, you just have to think of your users as customers. I think it's great to capture data. I think it's great to have those qualitative conversations with your users. I think some of the challenges, and though I see this changing, some of the challenges are just getting the budget and the approval and raising the level of importance and visibility in the organization. So a product, I think about a product, whether it's internal or external, as not just a collection of features, but it's the whole experience. And commercial software vendors more and more are thinking about it that way. And an internally developed software needs to think about it that way more. So it's about education, about new functionality. It's about walking people through activities. It's about analyzing how well your users internally are using the application and using that data to make improvements. So a product, whether it be external or internal, is much more than a collection of features. Did you have anything to add to that, Jim?
No, I thought that was a great answer. Yeah, that was great. I do want to let people know that I think we have a few more minutes left, and so if you have any other questions that you'd like to answer, just pop them into that question section of the side panel.
Yep, I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. Let's see. How about this? This looks like a good one. How often or how many metrics typically should PMs use? And I know we see this certainly from time to time. Is sometimes there's so many things to measure you don't necessarily know what the best ones are. And at what point do you sort of get data fatigue or overwhelmed by data? Jim, you want to take that one?
Yeah. And I think it's a tricky question because you need to know at what level are these metrics being communicated. So if I'm communicating with executives and my stakeholders about the metrics that drive the business, I'm talking with it's a handful. It's less than it's 5 or fewer metrics that are the things that really drive the business. For example, at ProductPlan, the things that we care about are we do NPS, so we look at Net Promoter Score. We care about customer acquisition cost. We care about churn and retention. So those big macros are like meta-level metrics are the things that we care about. However, underlying all of those are specific actions that the user could be taking or the specific things that the customer base takes that work towards improving those other metrics. And so underneath it all, you're looking at things like completion rate on certain features, usage on certain features, and so on. And the list can go on. And so I think it really depends on the level of what you're talking to. So if I'm working with customer success on certain characteristics of a successful customer, we're looking at multiple metrics. We're looking at feature usage, and we're getting more granular with those sorts of conversations. So, a tool or a software like Pendo is really great for looking at that, and then rolling it up to those big picture metrics. And so, I think the answer to the question is it just depends on what level you're looking at. And Eric, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I mean, I could, I guess, but we're running out of time, I know, and questions keep piling in. So I think you did a good job answering it. We did have a question about integration, vision of integration between Pendo and ProductPlan, and a couple other ones about how ProductPlan and Pendo can work together. And I would just quickly answer by saying, I think there'll be more to come. I think we have 7 questions related to that now. So it is something that, there is an opportunity for data and road mapping and planning to be more tightly integrated, and we'll keep everyone in the loop on that.
Good. All right. I think we got time for maybe one or two more questions. And actually, speaking of time, great segue there with this next question. How do you deal with time? Each fix, charge, or new feature takes time, and how much data should you collect before you take active steps based on that information?
Yeah, so there's a long and a short answer to this. I'll go through the short answer, how we deal with time. Everything does take time. What you want to do is you want to put together a repeatable mechanism. I mean, ideally, you put in a system that you can get data continuously, and it's not an added level of effort. So if you look like at a product, and not to overtly pitch Pendo, but it's a good example here. If you install Pendo, you put the snippet of code in your software application, we're now capturing everything going forward. We're even capturing things that you are not actively tracking. So we have all your data, and you say, oh, I'd really like to see how many people now have clicked on this button, and I wasn't tracking it before. I didn't think it was important. You can actually just go back, so to speak, in time. We still have the data and say, okay, now show me how this is trended, and add that to your dashboard. So I would say when you think about time, collecting data takes time. If you put some investment up front, either by spending the time building it yourself or buying a product, you can build that infrastructure so it's not an ongoing level of effort that you have to do every time you make a significant change or a change at all. So I would say, think about it and plan for data collection as part of your process. And with products out there like Pendo, you can do that in a way where, it's a minimal investment from the dev time. In our case, they're just, cut and pasting to some extent a snippet of code and should be up and running and collecting data within an hour.
All right, let's do one more question. Let's see, here's a good one. How often do you recommend to revise your roadmap? Should the roadmap be defined for a longer period of time? And what role does sort of, new data or new insights play into changing that? Jim, yeah. I assume that's going to be for you.
Yeah, I'd love to answer this one. We've had the opportunity at ProductPlan to engage with thousands of product managers and talk with them about their roadmap process. And the short answer, of course, is that it depends. The length of the roadmap and the amount of detail that you present on the roadmap depends on the audience that you're communicating with. So, for example, if I'm communicating with the engineering team, my roadmap is much shorter in duration. And it's much more granular about what it is that I'm building. So I'm still, and hopefully, I'm communicating the why of why the engineering team is working on something, and hopefully they understand as well the strategic goals of why you're working on certain parts of your product. But that duration is much shorter, so you might even be looking at it on a sprint basis or short-term, week-by-week basis, and then that spans a few weeks perhaps. But if I'm communicating with my executives, I need to bring it up a level. I need to bring it up to, we're certainly not looking at it at the story level. I may not even be looking at it at the epic level. I might be looking at it as like these long-term initiatives that help me meet my strategic goals. And so frequently, we're looking at durations of that roadmap of anywhere between 6 months and 18 months. So 12 months is very common to look forward 12 months about where we're heading. But of course, I need to communicate to my executives that the roadmap will change. And so, especially in this world of agile development, the roadmap is consistently changing. And so I think conditioning your executives that this is going to change, especially the fuzzier things are and the further things are out of the roadmap, I think the better off you're going to be. And the danger of presenting a long-term product roadmap of 12 or 18 or even 24 months is that people get locked into a certain way of thinking. And so that's part of the product manager's role, is to set expectations about what is coming. And so a lot of folks actually, for those long-term roadmaps, actually don't include dates. You can present a roadmap and just give people a sense of the direction that you're heading, a sense of the priorities that you have, how those priorities tie back to the strategic goals that you've set for the product. But then you're not actually saying that this particular feature is going to be delivered in a particular quarter. So that's my my answer for that one.
Okay, no, that's a great answer. And I think I want to thank everyone for joining today. I want to thank everyone who stayed long, and I especially want to thank everyone for the active Q&A and all the great questions we got in.
And I want to add one thing to Mike's thank yous. Thank you for the people that might not have been able to get in. We were oversubscribed. So for those of you who missed the beginning of the webinar because we had more attendees than we could support, there will be a recording that will be sent out to everyone who registered. So apologize for not being able to get everyone in the beginning, but thank you for being consistent and being persistent and being able to get in later on as we continued into the webinar.
Great, and thanks so much, obviously, Jim and the team at ProductPlan and everyone for joining us. Thank you for joining us this morning or this afternoon, and we will be sending out the recording to everyone shortly. Thanks so much,
Great.
and have a good day.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Mike.